Your Copic marker is a machine engineered for precision. It's a finely tuned engine, a race car. And most of you are treating it like a hunk of junk. In today's video, let's talk about a dangerous habit, and it's probably something you're doing right now. You totally overestimate how much ink is in a marker. You don't refill your markers often enough. If you wait until your marker runs dry before ordering a refill, then you've already been coloring badly for months, and you're risking the life of your marker. A car is actually a pretty good analogy for Copic markers because people kind of have the car mindset about their markers anyway. You put gas in the tank and you can drive that car at top speed until the second it runs out of gas. But that's not how markers actually work. Imagine a race where every trip around the oval, the car goes a little slower. First loop, everyone zips around the track at 200 miles per hour. Everyone has a full tank of gas. But on the second loop, they all go a little slower, maybe only 150 miles per hour, because there's less gas in the tank. Third loop, now the audience can really see that the cars are definitely not moving as fast as they were before. And on, every time around the track, the maximum speed gets lower and lower until finally the crowd is cheering for snails who are barely able to drag themselves over the finish line. Racing would be a completely different sport if the cars had to refill their gas tank after every few loops to maintain a competitive speed. Suddenly, racing would be a game of math. How long can you go slow? And is it better to make a pit stop after every lap or every third lap? That's a totally different sport. And folks, your Copic marker blending is exactly like the snail races. Inside every Copic marker is a core. It's a soft, fibrous sponge. This is what holds the ink, and this is what feeds the ink to both ends of the marker, each of the marker nibs. When you refill a marker, the core distributes the ink. It spreads it evenly through the sponge. Your marker is wet and juicy and ready to race. A factory-full Copic sketch marker weighs in somewhere around 14.6 grams, but we've seen some new batches coming into the stores recently, and some of them are as low as maybe 14.2 grams. Now here's the sad thing about markers. Ink is not magical. Every project that you color drains ink from your marker. Ink doesn't magically regenerate. First project, your marker is full. Second project, it's not as full as before, and that marker is not refilling itself. Some of you have been driving your race car around the track for years without a pit stop, which is why your blending looks like. Blending is a chemical process. People think blending is something we learn to do. I blend, you blend, he blends, she blends. You put one ink down first, then you add another ink on top. And if you choose the best colors and use them in the best order, and if you lay them on the paper in a perfectly perfect way, then voila, your blending looks smooth. You're wrong. You're not doing the blending. Every ink blend is a chemical reaction. If I pour purple ink into a glass and then I add some yellow, they're going to blend without any help from me. The same thing happens on paper, but only if there's enough moisture for the pigments to mix and merge. And that's the key. Inks will not blend. Actually, they cannot blend if there's not enough moisture. You're not doing the blending. You can rub and scrub and forcefully push ink onto the paper. But if your marker is not wet enough, the ink particles will not move. They cannot move. No particle movement, no blend. Your job is to apply enough ink onto the paper and then get out of their way long enough to let those inks blend. You're not doing the blending. The ink is. And if your marker has been around the track 500 times, if your marker isn't running on a full tank of ink, even if your marker is just a little bit low, it doesn't matter how talented you are or how many years of experience you've got. If your marker isn't full, then honey, it's not going to blend. Now here's the dirty little secret. Logically, we all understand every trip around the track, every project you color drains ink from your marker. What you don't realize, though, is how much ink you're using. I color big marker paintings working on paper that's 12 by 12 inches or larger. I can use a ½ gram of ink per marker on just one project. Someone who colors smaller images will use less ink. Unless you color light to dark, because that uses more ink than my big projects. And if you reblend your blends and you fix a bunch of mistakes a bunch of times, that'll use a ton of ink too. Here I am taking a fresh, full marker out for a test drive. Each row is kind of like a lap on the track. And with each row, the ink level in my marker is getting lower and lower. And right here, right now, I'm noticing a change in how the marker feels as I color. I'm feeling friction. And now the nib feels a little bit draggy. It's almost sticky. And here I'm fighting the urge to double over my previous stroke to increase the color. I'm also trying not to push so hard. So let's weigh this marker. Oh. Folks, this is why I refill my markers after every single use. Blending can only happen when the ink particles are swimming in enough solvent to blend and smooth themselves out. And right now, at just under 13.4 grams, my marker is compromised. When your finely tuned, highly engineered marker is running as little as 1/2 gram short, you cannot blend as well. And notice what you don't see. This marker does not look dry yet. It's not skipping, it's not leaving blank streaks. It may look normal, but it's too low on ink to blend properly. It'll take me another 8.5 rows and using up almost another gram of ink before the stroke actually looks dry. And that's the problem with a high-quality artist-grade marker. The marker is designed to give you pretty good, consistent color until the last possible moment. By the time you see the color go bad, you've actually been blending badly for a while. Most people don't have blending issues. You have refill issues. It's not your skill. It's not your technique. It's not the colors that you're trying to blend. Your marker is too dry to blend, and you don't realize it. You expected to color for years before needing to buy a refill. People run their markers dry. They actually wait until the marker squeaks and skips and stops functioning before they refill it. Which means that you've been coloring with an unblendable marker for weeks or even months. You can't treat your marker like a car. Cars do not get slower and harder to drive as the gas gauge gets down to E, but markers do. You can feel an increase in friction long before you see it in the color. And by the time your marker reads empty, you've been blending badly and feeling stupid about those bad blends for a long time. The reason you can't blend is probably not your technique. The reason you can't blend is because your marker is too dry. ready for more bad news? This dry marker thing, it hits the beginners harder than the pros. See, you buy that new marker, and what's the first thing you do? You doodle with it. Then you swatch the color. Then you make a big swatch set. Then you try some blending combinations. You haven't even colored your first project yet, and the ink level is already compromised. But wait, it gets worse. When you do finally color a project, beginners tend to use the wrong paper, which sucks more moisture from your marker. Beginners tend to color too slowly, which applies more ink to the paper. Beginners tend to use too much pressure, which squeezes ink from the marker. And beginners make a lot of corrections. The average beginner blends, then reblends, then goes back to fix it again later, and again and again and again. Beginners use way more ink than experienced marker artists. So your markers run dry faster than mine do. And remember, new Copics are now almost a half gram lighter than they were before. I don't think it's a coincidence that lots of people bought markers during the pandemic, and now we're seeing lots of people with crusty dead markers. There's this weird thing that happens in alcohol markers. You buy the markers and it's so much fun. And with only a little bit of practice, you're getting some pretty good blends. But as you keep coloring, the more you practice, the worse your blending gets. And you tell yourself that before, well, you just didn't know what you were doing. So maybe back then you really didn't know what a good blend looked like. Now with practice though, you're more of a perfectionist and you can see the flaws in your coloring. Things just don't look right. So you start looking for tips and tricks, and you start trying techniques that have been recommended by marker artists and instructors. And it helps a little bit, but you're getting kind of bummed because this blending thing is a lot harder than you thought it was going to be. Duh! This happens to everyone. Complete marker newbies can often blend better than beginners taking a beginner class. I'm not exaggerating. You blended better when your marker was 2 minutes old than you do now after months of practice. Want to know why? Because right now, your marker is too dry to blend well. Most of you have noticed that new marker feeling. You buy a new color and the marker feels juicy. Oh, it glides across the paper. Folks, you can have that new marker feeling every day if you just keep your markers at full weight. I noticed a significant decrease in the ease of blending and the smoothness of my blends at just 13.7 grams. That's not very dry. The reason why I blend so well is not because of my technique. It's my full marker. I literally refill my markers after every single project. Every project. I won't color with a marker that's lower than 13.5 grams. I can feel it when it gets to 13.5. I can feel it when the ink gets low. Now ask yourself, how low are your markers? This is part 1 of a 4-part series. Join me in the next part here, where I show you how to refill your markers and keep them in top condition.